Okay, well, I am going to say hello to everybody and welcome. Not everybody is on, but I will admit people as they come. I will ask everybody to do one thing, and that's to mute yourself so we can very much hear our speakers today. So I will welcome you all. My name is Carol Thea, for anybody who's on who doesn't know me. Here's Roseanne Weston for anyway. Okay, she came back. I am just going to welcome our speakers and then turn it up to Esther. So we're very, very happy to have Vivian Conan today. We're asking everybody to mute, so I please do that. Whoever came on, I can hear them. And I'd like you all to mute yourselves. Thank you. Roseanne, thank you. So we're going to have a firsthand account by Vivian Conan of living with what we call now DID, or as the vernacular went, multiple personalities. Vivian wrote a wonderful, wonderful memoir. I highly recommend it to everyone, called Losing the Atmosphere. And it is her story, and she will be talking about it today. Thank you, Esther. And I have it here too, but you do a better job. That's good. Yeah, I really recommend it for anybody, please, to read the whole thing, but you will certainly feel that way once you hear Vivian today. So I'm starting with introducing Esther Amini, who is one of our NISP longtime members. She was a teacher and she has been a presenter. She, as a matter of fact, some of you recall, presented for us her wonderful memoir as well, called Concealed. She has been rewarded amply for her beautiful work and has gotten so many awards for it. And we were lucky enough to have her here last year speaking to us. So she's a writer, a painter, and a psychoanalytic psychotherapist in New York. And as I said, a longtime member of the New York School for Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy and a past teacher of it. So Esther, thank you very much. I'm passing the baton to you. Wait, one more thing, please, everybody, and I'll have to say it again because people coming on are not hearing me. I guess I can mute them somehow. I'm asking everybody, please mute themselves until the whole presentation and program is over, at which time we will have a half an hour for questions. And so you will unmute yourself to ask a question, or I will unmute if I figured it out. And that will be for the last half hour of our program. But right now I am introducing Esther. One speaker at a time will be seen on the screen. It won't be a gallery view, so we can give them our full attention. Thank you, Esther. Esther Amini, everybody.
Thank you, Carol. And welcome, Vivian. What a pleasure to have you with us today. I'm sure this will be a fascinating and enlightening experience for all of our viewers. I'd like to begin by reading Vivian's bio. Vivian Conan is a writer, librarian, and IT business analyst. Presently, she's working part-time for a library in Westchester. Vivian grew up in Brooklyn within a large Greek-Jewish clan and holds master's degrees from Brooklyn College and Pratt Institute. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, New York Magazine, Lilith, Narratively, and Ducts.org. It took her 25 years to write her recently published memoir, Losing the Atmosphere, a baffling disorder, a search for help, and the therapist who understood her. This riveting memoir can be purchased on Amazon, and I'm sure you'll feel compelled to order it if you haven't already after you hear Vivian speak. Her book candidly documents her journey from birth to healing at 65. Vivian Conan will be sharing with us her struggles with multiple personality disorder. Today it's called DID, dissociative identity disorder. For decades, she lived in a fantasy world more real to her than the real world. She called the world the atmosphere. It was populated by kindly beings who watched over her and understood her. She also assumed a number of distinct personality identities, each with a unique name, personal history, and characteristics. Vivian was sent to her first therapist in 1958 when she was 16 because she talked to faces in her bedroom mirror. During several hospitalizations, she was labeled schizophrenic. At the age of 46, she was diagnosed as having multiple personality disorder. It took another 10 years before she found an attuned and knowledgeable therapist who understood her DID. Who understood it as complicated by an attachment disorder due to trauma. So, Vivian, the title of your memoir is Losing the Atmosphere. The atmosphere was a fantasy world you created as a refuge. Tell us how it came to be and the role it played in your life.
Well, first, thank you for the introduction, Esther, and it's good to be here. So, as Esther said, the atmosphere was a fantasy world. I did not create it on purpose. I was about 5 years old, like 4, 5, 6, I can't remember exactly. And before I tell you how it got created, I need to give you some context for what my home life was like. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of my home life. I lived with my mother, my father, and my younger brother. My father was loving, but he was excessively strict and prone to rages. And he was very, very involved in our upbringing. He had many rules. Some were hard to follow. Like, for example, he believed that heat was bad for you and cold was good. So at night, even in the winter, he would open the window wide and tell us to keep our feet under the covers. And we did, both of us, my brother and I, but by morning, our feet were icy cold. So he would come in the morning and feel our feet and say that we disobeyed. We didn't keep them under the covers, and he would hit us. And I used to try to explain to him that I had kept my feet under the covers, but I soon came to realize this was part of the morning routine. The less I said, the quicker it would be over and I could get up and get ready to go to school. So my mother was more normal, but she was colder. My father was loving. He was just very strict. My mother was colder. She didn't have any rules, just keep out of her way. She was busy with her career. She was a teacher. My father was a postal clerk who worked in the customs part of the post office because he was good at languages. So that was like, my mother would be very impatient. Even when I was 2.5, there was no Velcro then, and I couldn't tie my shoelaces. So when I asked her to tie my laces, she would get very impatient and say, when are you going to learn to tie them yourself? And she made me know she really didn't want to do it. When my father was away in World War II from when I was 2.5 to 3.5. So when he came back and I was 3.5, he saw that I couldn't tie my shoes, and he has a lot of patience. He just sat me down on 2 telephone books, put my shoes on the kitchen table, and he took one shoe and I took another, and he showed me step by step how to tie my shoes. And I felt very empowered once I knew how to do that. I felt if I could do everything for myself and I wouldn't bother my mother, she would love me. But anyway, that's sort of just for background. My mother also, my mother used to be very impatient with me. And if I got whiny, she would curse me and she would say, fuck. And one time I was walking in the street with my father, and I apologize for those who read the book because you already know this story. I'm just going to say it again. So I tripped on a crack and I said, fuck. And my father asked me where I heard that word. And I said, Mommy says it all the time. And he says, Mommy never says that word. And he asked me 3 times or 4 times where I heard it. And I kept telling him, and so he started to hit me, and he said, I'm not hitting you because you said that word. I'm hitting you because you lied. And then when my mother came home and he asked her, does she say that? And she said, yes. I thought he would come in to apologize to me, but he didn't. So I'm not going to tell you a whole lot of other stuff. That's just a background. And what I'd like to do now is read to you the way the atmosphere got created. This takes place when I'm about 5 years old. I was in kindergarten. And I'm reading from the book, even though I printed it bigger here. Once when I was in kindergarten, my mother went with me to a classmate's house for his birthday party. The cake was sliced, and I went to where she was sitting with the other mothers to ask whether I could have a piece. You know, Daddy doesn't allow cake, she said. I'd been hoping that since he wasn't there, she would say yes, the way she sometimes broke the radiator rule. Doesn't Daddy want me to ever have any fun? I asked, retreating to her lap so I wouldn't have to sit with the children in my shame. He just wants what's best for you, my mother said, but I could tell from her tone she was sorry and wished I could have cake too. Watching the other children eat, I wondered how it happened that I came to have my particular father and they had theirs, as if there were a pool of fathers and you were assigned one when you were born. I concluded that I was less deserving, somehow deformed inside where it didn't show. With sadness and with the pain in my chest that felt like a hole, I accepted this. In school, I tried to tell my teacher, Mrs. McCullough, about the hole. It came at the same time every day when our chairs were arranged in front of her piano for singing, and she looked around at all of us with her kind face. A longing woke in me then that made my insides hurt. Every morning, I walked up to her piano stool and whispered in her ear, I have a stomach ache. Hands on the keyboard, she would lean toward me and say gently, sit down and try not to think about it, and it will go away. The stab of disappointment always took me by surprise. She didn't see the hole. As I walked back to my seat, my insides hurt so much I thought they would break. Then, just as Mrs. McCullough said, the ache would go away and I would start singing like the rest of the children. Outside of school, I daydreamed that I had a sore throat. It was so bad that when Dr. Dalvin came to the house to examine me, he sent me to the hospital. I had my own special room because I was the sickest little girl there. Not even my mother and father were allowed to visit. Doctors conferred in whispers at the foot of my bed. Nurses in white caps smiled as they leaned over to smooth the fold of my top sheet and slip a thermometer into my mouth. I lay still and looked up at them. Only my eyes moved, and they understood that I couldn't talk because it hurt too much. Day by day, the story grew until it came to feel like an actual secret part of my life. One of the nurses brought me a doll with white lace around the collar of its pink flannel pajamas. She lifted the sheet to slide it in next to my burning fever face and stroked my cheek. The hospital world vanished when I was playing in the street with other children, but when I was alone, it started up from where it had left off. The nurse who had lifted my head from the pillow now held a glass of water to my lips. Soon in my secret world, I was sometimes another little girl, not in the hospital, but walking around doing regular things like going to school. No one could tell I had a big hurting hole inside me, except a different set of doctors and nurses. These weren't in bodies. There were loose molecules floating in the air, all mixed together. I knew about molecules. If you cut something in half, then in half again, and kept doing it, you would eventually get the smallest piece of whatever it was. The molecule doctors and nurses saw everything that happened to me and knew everything I thought and felt. They couldn't make the hole go away, but I didn't need them to. It was enough that I wasn't invisible to them. I wasn't invisible to the yellow sweater lady either. I met her the day my mother brought me to City College to lend me to a classmate who needed practice giving IQ tests to children. It was winter and I was wearing a yellow sweater and green leggings. That's a pretty sweater, the lady said. Is yellow your favorite color? Green is. I didn't mind that she had gotten it wrong. No one had ever asked what I preferred before. I arranged colored blocks into designs. Good, good, the lady said. Then she asked whether I was cold and whether I wanted her to shut the window. This was new too. My father acted as if being cold was my fault. That afternoon, while my mother read her book on the subway ride home, I looked at my reflection in the train window, a little girl with dark brown hair parted on the side, held in place with a barrette. I didn't turn away because I felt the yellow sweater lady looking down on me from above, her molecules mixed in with those of the doctors and nurses, and I wanted to keep seeing what she was seeing. So I didn't call it the atmosphere at that time. I didn't call it the atmosphere maybe until I became a teenager, but that world stayed with me, and that world was my refuge. It sort of saw me. The atmosphere, people didn't have to do anything to make my life better. They just had to know. They had to see and understand how I felt and sort of validate me. So that's basically how I created the atmosphere and what it did for me. And it stayed with me. Like it was adaptive at first. I tend not to like the word disorder, like that a dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder or attachment disorder, because everything that is called a disorder started out as an adaptation. The atmosphere helped me very much get through my childhood. It only becomes a disorder once you grow up and move out and no longer need it, but you can't get rid of it. That's when it becomes, and it's not really a disorder, then I call it a liability. I totally don't like the word disorder, but I know it's the terminology, so I use it. So the atmosphere stayed with me till I was in my 60s, really. I won't jump ahead, but it was the help of the therapist who wrote the afterword from my book who helped me get rid of it. Okay.
Right. Well, what we know today is that trauma causes DID. There can be sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, relational/attachment trauma, or neglect. Would you share your early life of trauma? Where would you place yourself?
Well, one thing I want to say up front, I was not sexually abused. And the reason I'm saying it right up front is it's the most common cause of DID. And a lot of times when people hear you have DID, it's assumed that you were sexually abused. I was not sexually abused. My trauma was more, and I never knew the word attachment trauma until I began working with the therapist that I'm working with now. Let me sort of say what my life was like. I will give an example. My father, as I said before, he cared a lot about us, and his rules all had to do with either health or safety or education. And both his parents died when he was still a teenager, and he had to drop out of school to support his 3 younger siblings. There was no welfare at that time. And so he used to tell me, if mommy and I die, you have to know how to support yourself. And so he taught me typing and STEM when I was 8 and 10 years old. I could do that. But every single thing of his rules, most of them were for your health or for your education. And he didn't like it if we read fairy tales because it wasn't. He said, what good is it going to do you to find out if a frog turns into a prince? It's not even real. You could be spending your time doing something useful. but the least of his problem was when he yelled. The most was he could give pretty stiff beatings. And they were all supposedly because I wasn't doing something for my own good. But he also had what I call a force field. And I'll explain what I mean. When I was in second grade, my brother and I both got an allowance from my mother. I got a quarter of a week and he got 10 cents a week because he was younger. And we both saved it up. There was not a lot of things to spend this on. And at one point when I was in second grade, my father came home with these 2 small radios, FM radios, and he plugged them into the room I shared with my brother, and he showed us how to play them very softly so we couldn't hear each other's radios. And so I listened all around the dial, and at one time I heard an announcer advertise a doll that sounded really good to me. You could feed her water and hold her upside down, and she would pee. And the doll was $5, and you could have her if you sent away for it. Now I wanted the doll. And I didn't ask my mother because she would have said, use your allowance. I didn't ask my father because it's not an educational thing. So I just wrote a letter, and I had $4.50. I borrowed 50 cents from my brother. I taped it onto the letter and I mailed it away. And a few weeks later, this doll arrives in the mail. And my father, the mailman rang the bell, which is unusual. It means mail doesn't fit in the box. So my father went down and he gets this package and he opens it and he starts shaking the doll, and her eyes are like opening back and forth. And he says, where did this come from? And I said, I sent away for it. And he said, what do you mean you sent away for it? Where did you hear about it? And I said, I heard about it on the radio. He said, you sent away for something you heard about on the radio? And he did. I thought he was going to hit me, but he didn't. He just marched upstairs with the doll, and he went into the room with the radios, and he tuned my radio to WNYC. And he said, this station doesn't have any advertisements. You're never to change this station. And then he turned my brother's radio to WQXR, which does have advertisements. So I didn't understand that. But what I mean by a force field is 2 years later, we moved into another house, another apartment that was bigger, and I had my own room and I had my own radio, and my father very rarely came into my room. And I don't think he remembered that he told me I was never allowed to change the station, but I did not change that station for about 10 years. And if the tuning drifted ever so slightly, it was like it was going on to communist territory, and I had to fix it. And that's what I mean by a force field. Like, even when he wasn't there, I internalized I just kept everything he said. Now, my brother was different because I used to pass by my brother's room and hear a baseball game coming from his radio. But that's what I mean about a force field. Now, my mother was different. She was very involved in her teaching career, and she had no patience for me, but sometimes she was also very real. She's the only one who would like write notes to school and make doctor appointments and stuff. And one time when my fourth grade teacher sent a note home saying I did poorly on the E-chart eye test and they should take me to an eye doctor, my father said, the teacher has no right to tell her what to do at home. You can't go, and eyeglasses will make her worse. My mother took me anyway. And when I came home with the glasses, my father told me I can't wear them. So my mother told me I could wear them when my father wasn't home, and I could wear them in the street. So for a month that worked fine. And then one day my father came home and I forgot to take them off, and he didn't even seem to notice. So I told my mother, and she said, okay, now you could wear them all the time. So, I mean, I'm sort of summarizing. My father, I was a goody-goody, and I didn't get beat up as much as my brother did. He was more rebellious, and he he got much more of the beatings. I think he was better off in the long run for having rebelled. I was not, because I didn't. I don't want to go into all the details of what their trauma was, but I will say something else though about my extended family. My extended family was wonderful. My mother was one of 9, 8 of whom lived to adulthood. There were a big Greek Jewish clan in Brooklyn. And when I was 4 years old, in the 4th grade, we moved into the house that 4 of those families, my mother, 2 of her sisters, and my grandparents all lived. It was a 4-family house. And my father was grooming my brother to be a concert pianist. My brother was a very good pianist. And he used to beat him up while he was practicing if he didn't go back and correct his mistakes. And one day my brother sawed he got a toolkit for his birthday, and he sawed the piano leg. He took the saw to the piano leg, and all the sawdust was on the floor. And I thought my father was really gonna beat him up, but I think my father was so stunned, he just reduced his practice from 4 hours a day to 3. This is for a little kid. But what I want to say about that is my father's yelling and hitting could be heard by all the other 3 families in the 4-family house. And I used to go down to my grandmother's kitchen and play canasta while my brother was practicing upstairs. And my mother would go down too. And we could clearly hear the piano music and the yelling and the hitting, but there was a culture of non-interference, I don't know, it was a European culture, and it was also the 1950s, and you didn't interfere with a nuclear family. So nobody said anything, nobody did anything, everybody knew. And when my aunts used to want to come up to, they wanted to talk to my mother, they would knock on the door, and if I answered, they would whisper, "Is your father home?" And if I said yes, they would say, "Oh, I'll come back later." And if I said no, they would come in and talk to my mother. So I lived with 2 families, my little family and my big family. And I would say that even though there was a culture of non-interference, I got so much benefit from my extended family. I was accepted. I could walk into their house, their apartment anytime, and sit down for lunch or dinner. I could sleep there. I was just part of it. I didn't have to prove myself to it. So that's sort of both sides of my family life.
Okay, so Vivian, I want to take you back to the different characters, the different personalities. You had many different people inside of you, and tell us about some of them.
Well, I think if I tell you first how I got to see my first therapist, it's a good way to get into it.
Okay.
So I started being more unhappy once I started going to school, and I listened to show and tell, and I heard what other people's lives were like and what they did with their parents. And so and then as I got to be, and I was probably like dissociative from the time I was 5, but I didn't know it. So the adaptive thing about dissociation is that I had some parts that were very traumatized, and I had some other parts that had no idea of the trauma. And when I was out of the house playing with my friends, I had no idea what happened at home. I just had a regular life. I went to school. But by the time I was in junior high, I still had a lot of friends, and I would giggle with them in regular teenage stuff. But I also started looking in the mirror and talking to what I call faces that weren't me. It's really unclear. Like, I don't know if I was talking for them or who they were, but I realized that something was not right. And one of my aunts who lived in the building, she was in psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis was very popular at that time. And she had all these books in her room downstairs. So when she was at work, I used to go down and read her books and look for a description of myself, because I knew it wasn't normal to talk to faces that weren't me. And I knew it wasn't, I kind of had like two versions of people that I liked or that were kind to me. Like my high school English teacher, Mrs. Warschauer, she was an English teacher. She was also the dean of girls, and I was a monitor in her room, and I liked her. And so over the years, I still had the atmosphere, and every time somebody was the least bit nice to me, they wound up being in the atmosphere. But their atmosphere version was different from their in-person version. Their atmosphere version knew everything I thought and felt without my having to say a word. And they also knew everything I did. But so this was in addition to the doctors and nurses who I didn't know. They stayed in the atmosphere. The yellow sweater lady who I met one time after like 4 or 5 years, and she never showed up again. So she was not in the atmosphere again. But Mrs. Warschauer, my English teacher, was. And I decided I would ask her because I couldn't find, I looked for a description of myself and it was saying schizophrenic, paranoid, hebephrenic. I don't know what I read, but nothing fit me. So I was afraid to talk to her in person. So I wrote her a letter and I left it in her office. And she sent for me and asked me about it. And first she thought I was pulling her leg. And I was so upset because in the atmosphere, she understood me perfectly. And here she didn't, she thought I was pulling her leg. So I got up to leave. And then she said she was sorry. She realizes now I was telling the truth. So she sent me to the school psychologist who was no help. But I just was relieved that I told her. I didn't care what else happened. And I made her promise not to tell my mother, which she did. But when I got home, my mother said, Mrs. Warschauer called. She said, you talk to faces in the mirror, what's going on? And I just did not want to talk to my mother. So my mother always someone who took action. She didn't sit down and talk a lot. So she found the name of a psychoanalyst who specialized in working with children. She made me an appointment. She gave me the piece of paper and she sent me on my way. She said, you know, whatever, Tuesday at 3 o'clock or whatever. So the therapist's name was Dr. Hirschhorn, Sue Hirschhorn. Before I even met her, I had her in the atmosphere because I was thinking that psychoanalysis was going to be just like the atmosphere where everything about me was going to be seen and understood. And I didn't differentiate. So this woman's molecules were floating about me all for 3 or 4 days before I met her. And when I did meet her and her in-person version, she was in what I used to come to call a skin container. She wasn't molecules floating in the atmosphere. She was in a body. I was so intimidated by her. And yet I had the atmosphere version of her. And what I can only say in hindsight was a switch to one of my inside parts that I call Emily, who is she's anywhere between 4 and 6 years old. And she's always in perpetual search for a mother. She has dreadful mother hunger. And that part of me, although I didn't understand what was happening, as soon as I walked into her office and sat down, I became mute. I could hardly talk. And I was so intimidated by her. And I was waiting for her to be like her atmosphere version where she understood me. But everything she would say, like, do you know why your mother sent you here? What school do you go to? And like, she wasn't connecting with me. And the easy questions to answer were, what school do you go to? What are your friends' names? But like, do you know why your mother sent you here is a very hard question to answer. I was 16 years old. And so I did not realize for 4 years that I saw her, that I very rarely was able to speak to her, that it was this switch. Every time I was on the bus to her office, I vowed that this time I was going to be able to talk. And I was this confident teenager. As soon as I walked into her waiting room, I switched and I could not talk. And she became very frustrated. It was a very long 4 years. But I will also read to you like what happened our last session, how it ended in 4 years. Let me just, before I do that, so after a while, I started bringing letters to the sessions because I wrote the letters at home when I was a teenager, and I handed them to her when I walked into her office. And she would read the letter while this 6-year-old Emily was sitting there. And then she would try to talk to me about what I wrote. And I wrote real things. I wrote why I was upset with my father, how I felt. I wrote what happened in school. I wrote like you could get a whole picture of my life from what I wrote. But after she read the letter, she would try to talk to me about what I had written. And the me who was sitting there is not the me who wrote the letters. And the Dr. Hirschhorn I wrote them to was not the Dr. Hirschhorn who was sitting in front of me. I wrote them to the atmosphere Dr. Hirschhorn to help her know what she already knew. Like I was helping the in-person version become the atmosphere. It was not a clear definition, but it never worked. So over the 4 years, she did get to know about me, but we never had a regular talking session. And so I just want to read what I didn't know when I walked in, but when I walked out, it turned out to be our last session. So she picked up the handkerchief, dabbed her nose, and turned to me. How are you today? Fine. Dr. Hirschhorn looked at me for what felt like a long time before she said, what does fine mean? Her voice was hard. Watch out. I don't know. Another pause. Why do you come here? For 4 years, I'd been certain Dr. Hirschhorn knew I waited all week to see her, that I longed for her to find the me who communicated only with the mirror people and the atmosphere people, that I needed her to feel the anguish and loneliness and emptiness. I was certain because she was part of me, I was part of her. I was certain even now, so I discounted her annoyance and didn't connect it to the pain I felt. I asked why you come to see me. I couldn't have explained even if she hadn't been scary. I don't know. She leaned forward. If you say I don't know one more time, you can't come here anymore. I didn't want to lose her, so I didn't say I don't know for the rest of the session. I said nothing, just moved my eyes, through which I tried to talk to her. Why do you swirl your eyes? I didn't want to say I don't know, so I shrugged. Somehow we got to the part where Dr. Hirschhorn said, it's time to stop. I walked out of her office feeling like a mechanized alien. My robot legs carried me down the carpeted staircase, past the European murmuring. That was a downstairs waiting room for her husband's practice, through the door to the street. Only when I was outside did I realize I had barely been taking in air. As I began to walk home, I saw with sudden clarity that all Dr. Hirschhorn had heard for 4 years whenever I whispered, I don't know, was I don't know. Up to then, I believed she knew that not every I don't know was the same. Each was the specific answer to her specific question, a different cry from my heart to hers. I believed she somehow understood the translation. Now I knew she never had. For the first time in the minutes following a session, I didn't feel the atmosphere Dr. Hirschhorn in the air around me, but I didn't need her. I wasn't a worm anymore, nor was I a yearning little girl. I was a mommy whose job it was to protect that little girl from ever having to sit in that big chair again. When I got home, I phoned Dr. Hirschhorn. I quit, I said, in a firm voice she had never heard. I'm not coming next week or ever. Okay, she said, not unkindly. Good luck to you. So that's one of my parts was Emily. And I have another part who I call almost Vivian, who's sort of like the administrator, and she takes care of things and makes sure things are running smoothly, like like when I was, not a teenager anymore, she made sure the bills get paid, that I got to work on time. So I think it was almost Vivian who got me out, who called and quit. But so that was another part of me. There's also someone that I came to call Wendy, who's also 4 to 6. I call Wendy the backside of Emily, where Emily is shy and is always in pain and looking for a mother. Wendy is very precocious and she's sassy and she'll talk back and I can talk about all that later, but there weren't like a lot, but those, if you read my book, I hate to say that, but it's hard for me to explain it out of context here. I'll say one more person. I do have a teenager that I call Lisa, who can be suicidal. And suicide is a very hard thing for therapists. Not suicide, but suicidality is a hard thing for therapists to deal with. And it's hard for the clients or patients, whatever you call them, because if you're honest with a therapist and tell the therapist if you feel suicidal, the therapist is by law have to report you. So, but it doesn't, being suicidal doesn't mean you're going to commit suicide. And I think I was sort of lucky in that my therapist, the one I have now and the one I had before that also, like they understood that being suicidal was protecting me, because when I was feeling the most pain and when I was feeling the most like I can't stand it one more minute, knowing that I would be able to leave anytime I want to leave was very comforting to me. So I didn't have to do it. I had all the equipment. I bought I had a plan. I had a drawer where I had everything. But just knowing it was there was so comforting to me that I didn't have to use it. And if I was like, it's hard to talk to a therapist about this, because I mean, most of you are therapists, and I know that you don't want someone dying on your watch. And also it's hard to figure out when you should do what the law says and report someone, and when it's part of someone's healing. So I'm not asking for a yes or no or whatever. I'm just putting it out there. And I'm saying I was very lucky along the way that I had people who understood that.
Vivian, I want to bring you up to the two last therapists that you had, Sarah and Jeffrey, and in particular, Jeffrey, because you shared with me a story that I thought would be very meaningful here. Jeffrey's response to the stolen cookie example. I mean, maybe you can give the background and bring it right through the stolen cookie. I mean, his way of responding is so much the way our institute trains therapists, and how to listen and what to listen for and how to verbally intervene. So I just felt it was poetic, and it will speak to so many of us.
Okay, well, I'm going to back up just a little. 1 second. At that time that I stole the cookie, I was seeing two therapists. I was seeing Sarah and Jeffrey. And I'll just explain how that happened. Over my lifetime, I had 7 therapists that were long-term, and long-term means 4 years or more. So therapist number 5 is the one I had when I discovered myself that I had what was then called multiple personality disorder. And the way I discovered it was at the time I was working 2 jobs to pay for therapy. I was working as a librarian and as an IT systems analyst at MetLife. I was working during the week at MetLife and on the weekends as a librarian. And I was very fine at work, and outside of work, I was always falling apart and in crisis. And she said to me one day, "You're a puzzle to me. Everything, there's nothing bad going on in your life now, and yet you're always upset." And I said to her, at that time, there was a lot of talk about reincarnation. There was a book called The Search for Bridie Murphy, some lady who had 1 million reincarnations. So I just said, and I felt that there was something inside me pushing and pulling me, but I didn't know. I said, well, maybe I've been reincarnated. Maybe you could hypnotize me and find out, who I really am or something. And she said, oh, there's no such thing as hypnosis or whatever. And, I mean, there's no such thing as reincarnation, and I don't know how to hypnotize anyway. So that weekend I was in the video store looking for, there were no DVDs then or streaming. There were video VCRs that you have to rent from the video store. I was in the video store looking for one to rent, and I happened to pick up Sybil, the story of, I guess you all know Sybil, the girl who had 16 personalities, the movie with Sally Field. But this was, I hear somebody, but I'm just keep talking.
Everyone has to mute themselves.
Please.
Go ahead, Vivian.
So I picked up Sybil, I brought it home, and as soon as I watched it, I just knew. And I was also horrified. Like I said, because it was called multiple personality disorder then. And it sounded like such a bizarre disorder. And the only thing I had heard of was the 3 Faces of Eve and Sybil. And, I was like a middle-class girl next door. I went to work, I took the subway. I said, may I help you, to patrons in the library? Like, how could I have multiple personality disorder? But the next time I had a session, I told my therapist, whose name was Mary Beth, I told her what I said, do you think there could be other people in me? I told her I watched the movie, and she said yes. And then we did watch the movie together. I brought it in, but she became, as an aside, Emily, my 6-year-old, was in love with her as a mommy, and Emily couldn't talk to her, but some of us could talk to her. But she was also in the atmosphere, but she did not know. I did not know to tell people about the atmosphere, because I understood vaguely that I had 2 versions of someone, but I would never think to tell someone I breathe in and out 9 times a minute, because it's just how I am. So I never thought to tell anyone about the atmosphere, because it just came with me wherever I was. So in the atmosphere, Mary Beth understood me perfectly, but the in-person Mary Beth became very upset with the concept of multiplicity. She didn't say I didn't have it, but she wasn't sure. And the bottom line is, she felt that if I did have it, her job was to force me to be one. And if I didn't have it, her job was to knock the idea out of me. And so we came to loggerheads, and we did not have a good ending. And actually, the way I was so upset, but Emily didn't want to lose her. So I told her I needed to take 3 weeks off to think about what was going on, because we were not getting along, my therapist and I. So I thought I would be fine for those 3 weeks, but I wasn't. And so I called up a therapist that I had known for many, many years before. When I was in the hospital, she was my roommate's therapist, and I liked her. So I asked her if I could just come one time to talk about the problems I was having with my current therapist. I was not intending to change therapists. So I did go see her, and she asked me if I wanted her to talk to Mary Beth, and I said yes. So then I saw the therapist from the hospital from a long time ago's name was Sarah. So when I did see Sarah a second time, and she said she spoke to Mary Beth, and that Mary Beth asked her if she would be my therapist. And like, I was stunned that Mary Beth was just giving me away. I was I had not meant to leave. I just meant to take 3 weeks off. So Sarah asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, it's not what I wanted, but if she doesn't want me, and I liked Sarah. And Sarah, the first thing I had said to Sarah before I made that first appointment, I called and she did remember me from the hospital. And I said to her, will you let me come if there's more than one of me? And she did not ask me what I meant. She just said yes. So she was already not antagonistic to me. So she's the one who became my therapist before Jeffrey. I wound up seeing her for 4 years. And she had no experience with multiplicity, but she was very willing to learn. And a book had just come out a year or so before by Frank Putnam from the National Institutes of Mental Health. And it's called Diagnosis and Treatment of Multiple Personality Disorder. So I bought 2 copies. I gave one to Sarah and I kept one. And I marked up every place in it that pertained to me. And she marked up, we sort of traded markup. And we did together write to the author. His name is Frank Putnam from the National Institutes of Mental Health. And he wrote back and he gave Sarah the name of the psychiatrist who ran a study group of multiple personality for therapists in the New York area. And he gave me the name of a publication called Many Voices, which was by and for people with dissociative disorders. It was a by.
Yeah.
I'm sorry? Oh, anyway, so Sarah didn't know about multiplicity, but she was very willing to learn. And Emily fell in love with her right away. And she was the first therapist Emily did not have a problem with. The thing is that although Sarah was not afraid of multiplicity, she never really got it. And this is where the story, the cookie story comes. So at one point, I was talking, I did find a support group also through the contact that Frank Putnam did. And one of the people I met in the support group said, why don't you ask Sarah to talk to my therapist, Jeffrey Smith, because he gets it, and he could help Sarah. So Sarah did that. And but at that time I said I wanted to meet him before Sarah did. So it wound up that I liked him and he got it. He got what Sarah didn't, but Emily was in love with Sarah, so I couldn't leave Sarah. So I saw him whenever Sarah went on vacation in the beginning. And this is when the cookie happened. So I'm seeing 2 therapists now. And I used to steal cookies from the supermarket and I used to eat them in the store. So I never got caught because I never walked out with the cookie. So I told Sarah one time, I said, I stole a cookie. And Sarah said, you stole a cookie? And the next day I told Jeffrey, I stole a cookie. And he said, somebody really wanted someone to give her a cookie. And to me, that was so amazing because I didn't articulate this to myself, but a cookie was something a grown-up was supposed to give you. It wasn't something you were supposed to pay for. And Jeffrey got it. And so it wound up that that's like an example of how attuned he was and how he would talk to who was ever there. For like Sarah understood the principles of multiplicity, but if I was in her office and something happened and triggered me to switch, I still look the same. I'm still wearing the same clothes, something, but she would pick up that something's different. And she would say, are you the one who was here before? I said, no, I'm the one, I'm here now. I'm the one here now. Before she would do that, she would finish what she was saying to the other person and then say, are you but Jeffrey was very tuned in to any switches and he would instantly change the way he talked to match it. So that's the story of the cookie that you asked.
Yeah. No, I was just so impressed because the fact that he said, someone inside you wants a cookie.
He didn't say someone inside you. He said somebody really wanted someone to give her a cookie. He covered all the bases.
Right. So that brings us to Jeffrey Smith's attunement to your stage of psychological development and where you were and how he facilitated the healing process. So maybe you can talk about that a bit. How did he facilitate the healing process?
Well, he figured out after I was seeing him just when Sarah was on vacation, I wound up seeing both of them for a while, and then I stopped seeing Sarah and I just was seeing him. He figured out somewhere early on that the atmosphere was not the same as the DID, and that the atmosphere was because of attachment trauma, and the DID was because of attachment trauma, but the attachment trauma was manifested in the atmosphere, and unless he dealt with the attachment trauma first, he couldn't work with the DID. Wouldn't mean anything because I wasn't sexually abused. I was attachment abused. What I didn't say in the early, when I told you about my early life, there was some things that happened that I only know anecdotally. But when I was born, my father forbid anyone to baby talk to me because I was supposed to be able to get into the job world. And the quicker I learned how to talk English, the better. And he also he believed in cold water closes your pores and you won't get sick. So when he gave me a bath when my mother wasn't home, he would plunge me, I'm a newborn, and he would plunge me into a basin of cold water. And he also believed that you shouldn't go into a baby who's crying because then they'll learn that all they have to do is cry to get what they want. So he didn't let my mother go into me when I was crying. So there was all these early attachment traumas that I did not know about. And I mean, anecdotally I knew, and I did tell Jeffrey, and he just figured that in order to make himself, in order to get me to give up the atmosphere, he had to address why it was caused, the attachment issues. And the way he chose to do it was, by the way, he and Sarah were also in the atmosphere, but they knew about it. They understood it. So I had two versions of him, in the atmosphere and in person, but his in-person version was so attuned to me that it was getting close to being like an atmosphere version. And his theory was that if he could consciously make himself like an atmosphere person, and I could transfer my allegiance from his atmosphere version to his in-person version, that after a while, I would be able to form relationships and attachments with people who weren't him. So my first job was to get attached to him as what I call a person in a skin container. And I also had a problem with object constancy. I would get very upset if he came with a different color socks than he had on the previous week, because that meant that he went someplace, that he wasn't in the atmosphere with me all week. He went someplace, he changed his clothes. If he had a different shirt on, maybe someone gave him a present. Like, I didn't want to know that. I needed to believe that from the time I waved goodbye to him in one session, he was just going to reappear that way when I showed up for the next session. And he understood that, but he didn't really get the full impact of how much it was to me until he likes to tell the story of Scarfield Scarsdale Ford. So it was a winter day and it was snowing, and his office is in Westchester and I live in Manhattan. And I was driving to the session, and because it was snowing out, they closed off my regular route and I had to take a different route and I got lost. So I called him from my cell phone and I told him where I was and I said, I don't know how to get there. And he said, keep going until you see Scarsdale Ford on the left, then turn right and blah, blah, blah. And the part of me, I also have like, there besides 4 or 5 personalities, I have like utility personalities. I have a driver, and the driver drives no matter what else is going on or who else is at fault. The driver has no idea. The driver just keeps the recommended 3-second distance from the car in front and signals when to turn. So the driver's driving, and I am really upset because he knows about Scarsdale Ford. That means he went someplace outside the office. That means that I arrived. His directions were very good. The driver got there. I walked in and I was so shaken. And when I tried to explain to him why I was so upset, I wasn't upset because I got lost or because I was driving. No, I was upset because his knowledge of Scarsdale Ford, a specific place on a specific corner outside his office, meant that he did other things in other places. And that he told me years later that that's the first that he really realized what my inner world was like. He makes, to me, Scarsdale Ford was no big deal. It was the same as his changing his socks. It was the same when he came in with a haircut. And it was terrible when he would go on vacation. I didn't really want to know a place that he'd be. So, but I did want to know. So I would say, are you going to be in another time zone? You know, and he would be very careful how he answered. So I think Scarsdale Ford was what put him on this thing that he was going to try to shield me from everything in his outside life. And he made sure to keep his old pair of shoes in the closet in his office so that every time I came, he would change into his old shoes. And, you know, he made it little by little. Every once in a while, there would be like an indication that like he would forget to turn the ringer off his phone. And like I knew someone else knew his number and was calling him. But little by little, and I'm talking about over years, I did become very, very attached to him. And then I would be nervous that I was attached to him, but you know, he was okay with that. And then little by little, as he predicted, I started becoming more connected to people outside of the therapy. And also, we never really addressed the multiplicity, but it sort of got a lot better by itself once the attachment issues got better by themselves.
So Vivian, I'm thinking about separations, and I'm sure it changed as time went on, but summer separations when Jeffrey would say he will not be in the office for X number of weeks, you didn't want to know, and you did want to know. So how was that handled? And perhaps the way it was handled evolved, but cover that a little bit. The therapist saying, we won't be meeting in 3 months from now at a given time. What did you need to know and what couldn't you need to know?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't want to know anything. I mean, I have been seeing him for a very, very long time. It's about 29 years now. I'm going to be, just for the record, I'm going to be 80 in May. So all this happened.
I did. I opened the window.
So in the beginning, I didn't want to know anything. And in the beginning, when he went on vacation, I had Sarah. And when she went on vacation, I had him. So it was a little bit of a buffer. There came a point where I did ask him if he was going to be in another time zone, And that's all I wanted to know. Then I did get to a point where I wanted to know which time zone it was going to be. At one point, I figured out that he was going to Europe. And he is from California, and he still has family in California. So he can go 3 time zones that way, or 3 or 4 times, he can go time zones either way. But there was one point, which I do describe in the book, where I needed to know that he was going to be in the same time zone, and that I was kind of ready to know. So I asked him where, and he told me he was going to New England. And this is when Wendy, who's the precocious 6-year-old who would come out in the sessions a lot with him, she said to him, New England is a lot of places. Where are you going? And he said he's going to Block Island. And she asked him one question or another, and it came out that he had a boat and he was going to sail to Nantucket or whatever. And this was like too much information, that he owned a boat. And because I knew that Sarah owned a boat, and then I found out they both I call it parked their boat, they moored their boat in the same place. I was very, very upset. But little by little, it got to be okay. But each time it wasn't okay, I would like carry on so much. And he was invariably understanding of it. And I'm going to jump the gun here because I want to read you something where the first time I bought him a present, when the atmosphere is sort of like a child's conception of the world. A newborn baby gets hungry and milk arrives in her mouth. She's wet and she becomes dry. She doesn't know if this happens from something inside herself or something outside herself. She doesn't even know she has a self. The atmosphere was like one primordial like soup where I was mixed in with everyone else. It's sort of like a baby's conception of the world. And even after the baby realizes there's mommy, and that mommy could sometimes walk out of the room and come back, the baby doesn't realize that the mother is putting herself out for this baby big time. And parts of me, I wouldn't say all of me, part of me knew very well that Jeffrey was putting himself out for me, but there were parts of me that did not know at all. And all of a sudden, one time, it dawned on me that he's really putting himself out for me, and I need to buy him a present or something. And I have this chapter in the book called The Saddest Present, but I just want to read like my realization, how I came to that. So every time in the beginning of a session, Wendy would say, she doesn't talk with good grammar. She would say, do you got anything to tell me? Meaning things that he knew would upset me, like he was going to go on vacation or he was getting a haircut. He would tell me ahead of time. So, do you got anything to tell me? Wendy asked. Yes. I stiffened and waited. I won't be here next Thursday. I felt a stab. Did you forget it was my birthday Friday? We had planned to celebrate during our Thursday session. The stab went so deep, I couldn't even punch him. I inched backward until I felt the wall behind me, then slumped forward, head between my knees. I'm sorry, Jeffrey said. He did sound sorry. I looked up to see him sitting cross-legged on the mat. I hate you, screamed an angry voice. You forgot my birthday, whispered a devastated one. I punched his arm several times. He pressed his arms into his sides, but didn't flinch. It suddenly struck me that I was carrying on like a 3-year-old having a tantrum. Jeffrey wasn't an atmosphere that had me. He was an ordinary human being, the kind you might see in the supermarket. A very wonderful human being. It was rare that he missed a session. He must have something he really needed to do, and I was making it so difficult. Part of me was still upset. Another part felt a surge of love for him. While one voice was whining, it was going to be my birthday, Another voice, grown up and calm, interrupted with, "Wait, I think it's time to give you a present." Jeffrey looked at me quizzically. I reached for my computer and began typing. Oh, that's another thing. Like sometimes when I couldn't talk to him, I would type on my computer and he would type back answers. That was another way we communicated. I reached for my computer and began typing. "When you're a baby, you would never think of giving your mother a present because your mother just is. She is part of you and you are part of her. But when you get a little bigger, you realize your mommy is a separate person and she can get glad at you and she can get mad at you. That is very scary. Now you have to do things to make her like you or you will use her up. When you realize you are supposed to buy your mother a present for Mother's Day, you cross into a whole different dimension. You lost something you will never get back." I passed the computer to Jeffrey. He read, but before he could type an answer, I took it again and continued writing. "We never thought of you as someone we needed to give a present to, but last weekend, something made us know that now we did. We remembered when you used to say you needed to be seen, and we knew you would be seen if we gave you a present. So we walked up and down the booths of the Columbus Avenue Crafts Fair, and then we saw a very special puzzle box with a secret compartment. When we were packing up the shopping bag to come here tonight, we put the box in and we were very depressed about it. Then we forgot it was there until we just got so upset when you asked us to change the session next week when it is our birthday. We realized we were right. It's time to give you a present. It's the saddest present we ever gave, but it's also a very nice present." I handed the computer to Jeffrey. This time when he finished reading, I reached inside the shopping bag and passed him a small package wrapped in white tissue paper. Jeffrey held it in his hand and looked at me as if he didn't know what to do. "Open it," I commanded. Rigid with anticipation, I watched him unwrap the layers of tissue. When at last he held the round box in his hand, he still didn't say anything. He just turned it over slowly, examining the top, the bottom, the side. But I saw that he was admiring the graceful streaks of dark brown grain running through the blonde wood, polished smooth as satin. "Take it apart," I instructed, "the side piece first." He fingered the side, then slid it up. It came off in the shape of a crescent moon. He slid the top off sideways to reveal another cutout piece underneath. I watched his face and was thrilled to see his appreciation deepen as he lifted the last piece and discovered the hidden compartment lined with dark brown felt. It was truly a magical box, small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, large enough to hold a secret. "Thank you," he said, looking up. "It's a very beautiful box." I felt powerful and grown up. I had given Jeffrey a present that made him happy. I had let him know I saw him. But underneath, a deep sadness started to roll over me. Before it completely engulfed me, Wendy, always close to the surface, popped out. "I think it's time to have some toast," she said gaily. "Good idea," Jeffrey agreed. We used to have toast together at the beginning and end of a session. But that's when I gave him I realized everything that he's doing. And that's part of separation, is to realize he's a separate person and he's really putting himself out for me, and I gave him a present. And another thing of separation, the toast reminded me. So we used to have toast is a comfort food for me. So we used to have toast in the beginning and end of the session. And he let me keep like the bread and the butter in his refrigerator. So I used to make the toast, and in the beginning, I made them both the same. Like I liked the idea that I was having the same sensation he was when he bit into the toast and I bit into the toast. And I don't know what happened, but over a year or more that we had toast together, I began, from little things that he said, I began to realize that he doesn't really like his toast the same way I like mine. I like mine crunchy and he likes his soft. So once I realized that, I started taking his toast out before my toast. And that was also like part of this separation thing. It's like, yes, we're both having toast, but we're not having the same toast, you know, and we don't like the same toast.
Okay, I have one last question for you, Vivian, before we open it up to the viewers. By writing your memoir, you've made a major contribution to the study and the understanding of multiple personality disorder, DID. Independent of the gift you've given to us as clinicians, what did writing this memoir do for you?
Well, first of all, I need to say that it took 25 years to write, and I wrote it in a writing workshop with the same teacher. The people in the class were a little different. And it was the first time that I came out of the closet to people who were not clinicians. They were just writers who were trying to help me tell my story better. And it's also the first time that I saw people. I didn't think anyone would be interested in my story. And in the beginning, I wasn't planning to write a memoir. I was planning to write an article that would show how difficult it was to go through your regular life, like go to work and go to the supermarket when you had what was then called multiple personality disorder. And I only put enough about me in to illustrate a point. And the class, the workshop said, this is all very interesting, but we don't care about the clinical theory. I put a lot of clinical theory. I only put me to illustrate a point. We don't care about the clinical theory. We want to hear your story. And I didn't know. I was at first very hesitant to write very personal things, but the more I did, and the more the class reacted positively, the more I saw that, first of all, I'm not a freak. People are telling me that they relate to what I'm writing. They might not necessarily have split into different people, but they all want to be seen and understood, and they all need to make connections with people. And basically that is what my book is about. So it gave me a lot of morale to be with these people who were not clinicians, who did not look at me like I was a freak and just like really cared about my story. So so I would say like the first 20 years or so, I became part of a writing community. I was getting better at the same time that I was writing about getting better. And I was also kind of assembling myself in a book. So it was therapeutic to write the book at the same time that I was wanting to write it as a good writer. I didn't just want to write it for therapy. And about 5 years before it was actually published, I became nervous about coming out to my family. I mean, my family knew I was in therapy, and they knew I've been in the hospital 3 times when I was in my 20s, but they didn't know the words multiple personality disorder. So I wound up printing the early versions of the book on 8.5 by 11 paper and having it bound in staples. And I asked my brother, I was most nervous about him. I said, could you read this? And if there's anything in it that bothers you, I'm not going to change it, but I'll change your name. So he took it. He said, I'll read it if you want me to, but I know right now I'm not going to ask you to change anything. It's fine with whatever you wrote. So I felt really good that he did that. And then I have because I had so many aunts and uncles, I have many cousins. So I let anybody for about 2 years or 2 years before the book came out, I let them, anybody who wanted to read it. And I got such positive feedback from my family that it was, I don't know what I expected, but I was very gratified. Like some people said, we knew that we always knew, you know, your father was strict. We never knew you were having such a hard time. I wish I knew, you know. And these are people that saw me like day to day, week to week. And they all really gave, it was an amazing thing for me to come out to my family that way. And some of them asked me if they could let their friends see it, so that was very good. The other hard thing about it was coming out. I still time in a public library, and I was very worried about coming out to my work colleagues because they knew a lot less than my family knew. And so luckily my book came out during COVID and I wasn't going to work. I didn't go to work for 18 months. And during those 18 months, I did get emails from a couple of, I work like as a fill-in part-time librarian in a couple of libraries in Westchester. So at 3 of those, asked me if I would do a Zoom library program. So I did. And so by the time I went back to work, last September, I went back to work after not going 18 months. It was kind of like I had done the Zoom program. They had read the book. My current supervisor at work at the time that I did a program in that library, she said, this was totally shocking to me because I just know you as a confident librarian who's always on the ball. And this is a whole other side of you I never saw. And I was worried that our relationship would change, but it hasn't. I've been, that was like 6 months before I went back to work in September. And now I'm back to work already like more than half a year. So everything's okay with that. And the nice thing I like is when people who have DID read it and they email me so that's what the book was like.
Okay. So unless there's something else you want to add, Vivian, I thought we could open it up to the viewers. Anything else that you feel you'd like to add?
No, I like to take questions. I like questions.
Okay, Carol, I don't know